So I was talking to an INTJ friend of mine recently, and he was telling me that he had thought that he might be autistic previously and had sought an evaluation for this. The results of which had confirmed that he was not autistic, but it was interesting to me nonetheless because he was not the only INTJ friend that I have known who has thought this and has sought to be evaluated for this. So, what is it about being an INTJ that might predispose one to being more inclined to thinking that they might be autistic? Well, it has to do with the difference between effluent thinking and effluent feeling, right? Because an INTJ is going to have effluent thinking as their creative function. Your creative function is your second function, and it's going to be the way through which you manifest the knowledge and information that you have garnered through your first function most frequently. So for an INTJ, that's going to be effluent thinking. And what does that mean? Well, the difference between our thinking and feeling functions are predicated on order. And when I say that, I don't mean order and disorder. I mean actually sequence. The sequence with which they consider things. Now, thinking functions are functions that start from the self and then extend into the world. And so a thinking function starts with either the self-concept I and the constellation of beliefs that surround that self-concept, or with the body and the constellation of sensations that are associated with that body, and then extend outward to act on either other concepts or on other bodies and objects in the world. So that's a thinking function. Now, a feeling function does something differently. It starts with the other bodies or objects in the world, and it asks, how do I need to modify my body in this situation to accord or concord with the objects and other bodies in the world? Or I start with with a concept, and then I ask, how do I modify my self-concept in relationship to this new concept, right? How do I feel about this concept? Do I like Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Taoism, whatever it may be? You probably have a relationship to each one of those concepts, and those relationships look like a judgment because it is going to be expressed as a value judgment to some extent. You're either attracted to that concept or to some extent you're averse to it. And so that's why our feeling functions often look like judgments, like qualitative judgments, because they're responses to objects in the world or concepts in the mind. Now, since an INTJ is going to have effluent thinking as their second function, as their creative function, that means that they have to necessarily suppress or suspend their evaluation of the states of objects in their environment and pay attention to the state of themselves as an object first before acting on the environment, right? So this can often manifest to others as looking somewhat inconsiderate. Now, not necessarily, and there are plenty of INTJs who are very considerate people, but it's because they have established that as a value that they hold, and they modify themselves such as to behave as a considerate person within the world, not because the people around them have, through their states, conveyed to them that they need consideration. They do it because it's a value that they hold, not because it's one that is expressed as a need or as an appropriate response from the objects and people around them. Now, because they consider themselves as an object prior to considering others in the world as an object, they don't have very good object boundary sensing for others. So when they read other people's faces, they don't necessarily get a lot of information in terms of the boundaries of that face, of the expressions and the wrinkles and the tone of voice that other people are communicating with. They're not necessarily going to pick up on all of those cues. And it's not necessarily going to inform them subsequently as to how to respond appropriately in a way that comports or that is concordant with the other person's state. And this looks like they're socially inept or like they're just not with it socially. Well, it's because that's just not their mode of operation. To do so would be to sacrifice the thing that they're really good at doing so that they can engage in doing something that they're never going to be that great at doing. Right? It's just not their default orientation to things. So, with that said, the reason that INTJs are likely to suspect that they themselves might be autistic is because their natural predilection and default mode is going to be to consider themselves first as an object in the environment and then consider how they might modify the environment so as to meet the needs of themselves as an object prior to their consideration of the objects in the environment and how they need to modify themselves in order to meet the needs of the objects in their environment. So I hope that helps, and I hope that sheds some light on things. I think there's probably a lot of INTJs out there who have been inappropriately diagnosed with autism due to being around people and in environments and through examiners who don't quite understand this and how other people might not be able to do this well. That's not to say that there aren't truly autistic people out there. There certainly are. But if you are an INTJ or some other types that have weak effluent feeling, INTPs, you might not be autistic. It just might not be your mode of operation in the world. And that's okay. So, I hope this helps.